Booksy friend, and I am talking about Tolkien today. We are still at the start of the Quenta Silmarillion, or the history of the Silmarils. At this point, we know about Iluvatar, the creation force who lives outside of the world, out in the void, and we know about the Valar, who are spirits created by Iluvatar, who entered into the world to help put it all together in preparation for elves and humans to wake up. So the Valar have already completed their labors. They put together all of the lands and seas, and they built a little home for themselves right in the middle of the world. But after winning a war against Melkor, Melkor returned and tore down the great lamps they had created. This caused the world to break apart, and in the chaos, Melkor fled and hid in his underground fortress of Autumno. The Valar gave chase, but they couldn't waste their energy trying to dig him out of his fortress because they still had to go and fix the mess he had made. We begin the second part of this chapter with the Valar. Their work was in tatters. The earth was broken, waters were roaring, fires were raging, and all they could really do was try to calm the elements and salvage whatever possible. Remember, somewhere in the earth, there were elves and humans sleeping, waiting for their time to wake up and experience the world. So once the Valar put out all the fires and calmed all the waters, they didn't want to risk putting everything back the way it was in case they disturbed the resting place of the elves and men. So they just had to leave it as it was. Once there was order again, they packed up their suitcases and went in search of a new home. So at this point, we now have three land masses. Aman in the west, Endor, or Middle Earth, in the middle, which was the largest landmass, and the lands of the sun in the east. The western sea that was between Aman and Endor was called Belager, and the sea between Endor and the lands of the sun was called the East Sea. The Valar roll their suitcases across Middle-earth and into the far west, deciding to settle in Aman. They were worried about Melkor coming after them and attacking them, so the first thing they did was on the shores of Aman, the shores that faced Middle-earth, they rose up a massive mountain range called the Pelori. At the top of the very tallest mountain in the Pelori Mountains, Manwe and Varda set up their home. This mountain they named Taniquetil. From their new home, Manwe and Varda could see all the way across Middle-earth, even into the far east. Once their defensive mountains were set up, the Valar went a little further inland and found a region in Aman that they liked, and they decided that would be their new home. They named this region Valinor. In Valinor, the light and power of the Valar was concentrated. This caused the land to become blessed. Plants that grew there were undying. There was no sickness or corruption, and even the stones and water were hallowed. In the center of Valinor, the Valar unpack their bags and decide to build their city. They named this city Valmar, of many bells. We don't know a lot about what the city looked like. Christopher Tolkien tries to give us an idea based on different writings. We know that there were golden streets and silver domes on many buildings, but that's about it. We know that Manwe and Varda live on top of Taniquetil, so I'll briefly go over what we know of the homes of the other Valar as well. I had to use the Book of Lost Tales to supplement information that I couldn't find in the Silmarillion alone. Within the city of Valmar itself lived Aule, Yavanna, Tulkas, Nessa, Orome, and Vana. Tulkas and Nessa lived in a home with many stories and a tower of bronze. Orome's halls were held up by living trees and decorated with pelts, antlers, and other trophies of his hunts. Aule also had mansions in the city where he lived with Yavanna, and all we know about his mansions really is that he had rooms and forges for his crafting. Outside the city, we have Manwe, Varda, Mondos, Vaire, Lorien, Este, and Nienna. Mondos and Vaire live in the Halls of the Dead, which are also called the Halls of Mondos. in the western part of Valinor. Near the Halls of the Dead, but even further west, the furthest west of any of the Valar, were the halls of Nienna, where she lived alone. Lorien and Este lived in the gardens of Lorien, and the last Valar, Ulmo, does not have a home inside Valinor. He prefers to live in the deep parts of the seas and not be tied down to one particular place. Now, near the western gate of Valinor was a mound of earth. In true Tolkien fashion, it has two names, Corolere and Ezelohar. I will be referring to it as Ezelohar. Once the mansions and labors were complete in Valinor, Yavanna sat upon this mound and thought of all things that grow. There she began to sing a song of power, and soon Nienna joined her and began to weep, watering the ground with her tears. As Yavanna sang and Nienna cried, the rest of the Valar joined them. Near Ezelohar was a circle of thrones for the Valar, called the Ring of Doom. Not Mount Doom, the Ring of Doom. Doom in this case, I assume, refers more to the idea of judgment. If you think of Mondos being able to deliver the dooms of the people of Middle-earth, that means more of judgment and not doom in the sense of we're all doomed. Tolkien doesn't tell us if the Ring of Doom was there before Yavanna started singing, or if the Valar were kind of lured over by her voice and then decided to put together some thrones to sit on and watch. I like the idea of them just pulling over some rocks and setting up a little seating area to listen, because I also like to listen to music while I work. Anyway, the Valar sit in the Ring of Doom and listen to Yavanna and watch both her and Nienna. As they watch her, two shoots begin to grow out of the earth. And as the shoots grew, the entire world went silent. The only sound was Yavanna's voice. The shoots grew into saplings and then taller and taller into beautiful trees. Finally, the trees began to flower. These trees were known as the trees of the Valar and were the most beautiful and famous of all of Yavanna's creations. One had leaves of dark green that beneath were a shining silver, and from each of his countless flowers a dew of silver light was ever falling, and the earth beneath was dappled with the shadows of his fluttering leaves. The other bore leaves of a young green, like the new opened beech. Their edges were of glittering gold. Flowers swung upon her branches in clusters of yellow flame, formed each to a glowing horn that spilled a golden rain upon the ground. And from the blossom of that tree there came forth warmth and a great light. Of the many names that were given to the trees, the most commonly known were Telperion for the silver tree and Lorelin for the golden tree. As the dew fell from Telperion and the golden rain fell from Lorelin, it created pools of water beneath the trees, which Varda hallowed. Each tree took 7 hours to fully bloom and then fully wane. The second would begin its bloom 1 hour before the other finished. Take a look at this graph. It's what I needed to fully understand because I couldn't put together in my mind what that actually looked like. Basically what it means is there are two high points of light during the day, and in the time where they are both dimly lit, that was a time of low light and quiet and peace. Each day in Valinor was 12 hours, allowing each tree to bloom fully once a day. This cycle of steady, consistent blooming and then waning allowed the Valar to begin measuring time. Thus began the days of bliss in Valinor, and thus began also the counting of time. Thank you for spending some time with me here today as I talked about Tolkien. I hope you'll join me next week when I go over what happens in the 1,000 years between the creation of the trees and the time in which the elves awaken in the world. If you enjoyed this video, please leave me a like and I'll see you next week.